This morning's scripture is from Matthew chapter 2. Herod became furious when he realized that the astrologers had outwitted him. He gave orders to kill all male children that were 2 years old and younger living in and around Bethlehem. The age of the children was based on the date Herod had learned from the astrologers. Then, what was spoken through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, sobbing and lamenting loudly. It was Rachel, weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled, for they were no more. After Herod's death, the angel of God appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt with the command, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and set out for the land of Israel. Those who had designs on the life of the child are dead." Joseph got up, awakened Jesus and Mary, and they returned to the land of Israel. Joseph heard, however, that Archelaus had succeeded Herod as ruler of Judea, and Joseph was afraid to go back there. Instead, because of a warning received by Joseph in a dream, the family went to the region of Galilee. There they settled in a town called Nazareth. In this way, what was said through the prophets was fulfilled. He will be called a Nazarene. Ancient words for our present-day consideration.
End of a very long sermon series using the sketches of Escher and the parables of Jesus, or in Scripture, to get across what I think is a very important point, that I think if you look at somebody like Jesus or Buddha, they're trying to teach awareness, right? But what happens then is the church comes along. It's a whole lot easier to teach creeds and beliefs than to actually help somebody find their own wisdom. So somewhere along the way, the church left really the teachings of Jesus and came up with creeds that were more about sacrifices, about power. And there were ways that Christianity could be reshaped so that it worked effectively within the Roman Empire. This is very important, and that is the Christianity that is functioning, unfortunately, very, very well within the American Empire, where all you have to do is say certain words and you're on the team. Whereas when you look at Jesus, it was much, much clearer you needed to love. And that was the only test that mattered. So, we're looking at the last, what I would call a parable, and that's the story of Herod. Realize the Christmas story was written hugely after the fact. Each of the gospel writers had very, very different intentions, purposes. None of them were trying to do history. That is not the purpose of religion. What they were trying to do was awaken people, to set lives on fire on behalf of humankind. Herod, the reality test of the Christmas story. Because sometimes when we look at the story, we make it about tinsel and angels singing on the roof. And I don't know about you, I've not had that many angels singing on my roofs as I've walked along the journey. I've not seen anybody walk on water. I've not seen anybody raised from the dead. So I think the safest way to understand a lot of these things is not as false, but as parables of the life process. Things are being put in stories that make sense at a child level, but illustrate truths that are so profound you'll be learning from them your whole life. That is the way I understand these stories. And Herod is there as the reality check. To know that Jesus was not born in a gingerbread house with fairies dancing in the yard. He was born wanted. Wanted because he was different. Wanted because he was a threat to the empire. Before he was born, as a baby. And Herod is very closely linked to the astrologers or the wise ones or the three kings or whatever we call them. I think three wise men is too kind for these people. They went to the wrong place. And they wound up tipping off Herod. Again, when religion thinks it's apolitical, that just means you're high enough on the food chain where you don't have to think about that. Right? If you're religious and you bash gays and you think you're not political, if you're religious and you bash immigrants, or Black Lives Matter, or you can make the list as long as you want to, that is political. If you are a Christian and you're preaching by a flag, that's political. If you pray for our troops but not for our enemy's troops, that's political. So Herod represents the reality of the fact that religionists who don't realize they're political are just people of privilege. That's another nice way of saying it. These religious people go straight to Herod and say, hey, I hear there's a new king. Oh, great. Great. And they're able to use their work, their religious work, to locate and begin the hunt. Because if religion is not based on love, it's probably going to be predatory. It's probably going to be based on finding the bad person, punishing the enemy. And the whole atonement scheme, where Jesus gets beat up because God was mad at us, and Jesus was willing to step in and take, the abuse. That didn't come from a mature heart or a wise mind. That's political. That's politics. The reason the story's told on the solstice is because it's also got a cosmic underpinning. Have you ever seen the yin-yang sign where it's black on one side with the white dot, white on the other side with the black dot? That's the solstice in the Christian mythology. Earlier religions had these stories of the gods being born on the vernal equinox when you'd expect it at spring. Right? That's when gods are born. Spring, flowers and all that kind of stuff. And then in the winter, when all the trees have lost their leaves and stuff, that's when they die. So what the early wise people in the church was juxtapose those. Where the Savior is born on the winter solstice, when everything's dead, and then springs to life, or is crucified, and then springs to life on the vernal equinox, when everything is green and luxurious. What that's doing is allowing us to live in the circle of life all through the year. In spring, we don't forget that winter will come. But in the winter, we don't despair thinking spring will never come. Life isn't like that. Nothing is permanent. So, that's sad news, and it's also very gracious news. So part of what the punchline is going to be today is to realize that death is as important to your happiness as birth. Accepting that. When we say no to death, we're saying no to nature. We're saying, I approve this part of nature, I don't approve that part of nature. Which is understandable, but it unleashes so much fear. So much fear. When people say, if anything ever happens to me, you just got to be a little bit sad. Right? Spoiler alert. None of us gets out of here alive. and it's okay. If you identify as the life process itself, if you identify with this, then fear will fill every pore in your body. So the call is to go deeper into life, into nature, where you realize that life and death are not two different things. They are aspects of a great circle of life. And I love the Elton John lyrics where it says, some say eat or be eaten, some say live and let live, but all are agreed as they join the stampede, you should never take more than you give. In the circle of life, it's the wheel of fortune, it's the leap of faith, it's the band of hope, till we find our place on the path unwinding in the circle of life. Consider my cost to be comments right now. Dramatic, tension building moments. So let's look at the Escher drawing. If you look at this, it may not seem real happy. You've got an eyeball, and it's reflecting a skull. And it's that idea that life and death are aspects of one another. Until we can lose our fear of death, it's really hard to be fully alive. You know what I'm saying? When our biggest agenda is to hold on to life, as Jesus said, you lose it. When you try to grab life and get a stranglehold and keep things from changing. So Herod is the symbol of that part of ourselves that prefers the past to this new age that's being born. Herod is very popular in Texas, where it's trying to get back to something that supposedly used to be. And it doesn't take evil or mean, cruel people. It's bad theology. And when you believe that, you're capable of almost any evil. Almost any evil. You'll betray almost anyone to feel safe. You're not meaning to be cruel. You're not meaning to be stupid. But you have to renounce science. You have to renounce reason. And that's the Herod in us. In fairy tales, that's the dragon that's guarding the virgin as though it could do something with the virgin. Who is it? Joseph Campbell would talk about that. And then guarding treasures and things that, dragon doesn't have any use for treasures either. You just guard it because you don't want things to change. If you go to Facebook, you'll see this every day. Where people look like they're talking to you and with you, but they're using their reason to shut down new insights because they're afraid. Right? The world is changing and they don't have a way of comprehending that. So they're using reason to shut you down if you have a new insight. They'll misphrase what you said. They'll twist it. And what they're trying to do is shut down the conversation so they're not afraid anymore. How did we get, as a country, to valuing Confederate statues? What could be more pathetic than that? The people who say, the best years of my life were the 200 years before I was born. Fighting for a god-awful, nefarious cause of enslaving my human family. What is the wound that takes people to that place? They just don't want to hear. They shut down science, they shut down press, they shut down journalism, because it's the only way to choose the past over this new age that's being born. But to realize if we don't quit, the new age is just going to come. Right? If we don't let bullies frighten us away from the message of compassion and hope, it's going to come up like the sun. The past and the future are both important. You got to have tradition along with, but to realize that time only goes in one direction. That's kind of important too. There's not a balance there. Time never goes backwards, ever, ever, ever. So we have to be preparing for change and surrendering the things of the past in faith and trust. Not in what a preacher says, but in life. I always hate at funerals when preachers get up and act like they've been to heaven and they're talking about what's there. You can't trust that, but you can trust life, whatever it is you come out of. Whatever is sustaining you now is what you're going to return to. You can't know what it is, but you can trust it because your source is also your destination. I think Herod also represents trying to feel safe by stepping out of the circle of life. Acting like we're not animals, we're not interwoven on the tree of life. What happens then is we choose certain parts of life that we like and other parts that we don't. We like birth, we don't like death. As those were not absolutely yoked. If before you were born, you had said yes to all of it, then it wouldn't surprise you when people come and go in your life. You'd realize that's the dance that I'm doing here. And I'm not like a permanent being watching everybody else come and go, right? The dance is what we essentially are. So when you go to the beach and you see the waves rising and falling, you don't get inflated joy when the tide comes up, and you don't get depressed when it goes down. Right? You accept the deal that's there. For there to be waves, they have to come and go. That's what a wave is. And when you go down to Town Lake, Texas, we exaggerate everything. Town Lake is a river, obviously. And we can love a river that's on its way somewhere else. We can love it as impermanent. We need to learn to do that with ourselves and each other. To realize the all-important, sacred moment that we share together without pretending like we've got this guarantee of a certain amount of time. Maybe that's the way things should be, but they aren't that way, and we don't get to vote. I think if we really stepped at and looked at the whole tree of life, we would never want something different. I mean, I love you as you are. I don't want you to change, but think about that 1,000 years from now. Right? What a horrible fate that would be. If we took up an acorn and we didn't want it to become an oak tree, right? If you fell in love with the acorn and you couldn't let it go, you couldn't let it grow into something new, that would be very sad. So there's a wisdom we need for each other and for ourselves to realize that the life process is this grand dance. And the context is much greater than anything that's happening to us alone. It's happening to all of us together. So the first thing is to choose a future over the past, or even start with the present over the past. And then to realize that we are not safer by stepping out of the circle of life, quite the opposite. And then finally to realize that your death is as much a part of your happiness as your birth. And until we know that, we're not fully alive. And until I've accepted the fact that I'm going to die, it's really hard to appreciate you. I'm spending my time trying to be distracted from what is one of the central facts of my life. In mythology, they have the picture of the snake that's eating its tail. Joseph Campbell speaks about that. He says, out of perfection, nothing can be made. Every process involves breaking something up. The earth must be broken to bring forth life. If the seed does not die, there is no plant. Bread results from the death of wheat. This is the sense of the symbol of that snake that's eating its own tail. Everything that lives on the death of something else. Your own body will be food for something else. Anyone who denies this, anyone who holds back, is out of order. Death is an act of giving. And that's certainly one way to understand when Jesus says, eat of my body. That's the life process, right? To enter into that fully and completely. We talk about the resurrection often in traditional Christianity. Is it really a resurrection at all? It's more like a zombie apocalypse. What is more horrifying than bodies getting up again? We may not like the idea of life transforming and morphing into new forms, but geez, like, there was a poet named Kim Paderoth who put it this way. Sort of the upsetting nature of zombies. I don't really believe in zombies, but I think zombies are not fully dead. They upset the essential balance of nature. No animals eat zombies, apparently, and zombies do not seem to decay at all. To the point of disintegration and reintegration back into the soil. So the food chain or the circle of life seems to end or be short-circuited by their existence. Zombies fulfill the worst potentialities of humans to create a hellish kingdom on earth of endless, sterile repetition and boredom. In a way, isn't that the heaven that we were taught? Something artificial, laminated up in the sky. What a greater heaven to be in the dance of life and to come in and out of that. In the ancient world, they always tried to remember death. One of the practices was to bring a skeleton to the party. Now, probably you'd never get invited back again, so I'm not recommending that. But what if you didn't get lost in happiness? What if you enjoyed what was there as it came and let go of it when it came time for it to go? They also believed, and I love this, they looked at the palm, they're very creative, and they saw M's on both hands. And I thought I was going to look it up, and I forgot. It's memento mori or something like that. Remember, you're going to die. Written on the hands, they thought. What if we realized that death is no more an enemy than birth is? That you cannot separate nature out. You can't say, I like this part of nature, I don't like that part. I think Herod carries a lot of weight in the Christmas story. And he represents a political bully. He represents those who choose the past over the future. Those who believe they can step out of the tree of life to hold on to power and wealth. They also represent people who don't realize that they don't need to fear death. And the violence that Herod unleashed was a fear. I'm going to leave the last word today to Elton John again. Some of us fall by the wayside, and some of us soar to the stars, and some of us sail through our troubles, and some have to live with the scars. In the circle of life, it's the wheel of fortune. It's the leap of faith. It's the band of hope. Till we find our place on the path unwinding in the circle of life. Well, these are my struggles with the text. We take a minute now for you to consider how you would understand these words. Do you have a little bell? Oh, Okay.